Hi guys, so I put a couple of photos onto social media about me making some of these reusable bags for fruit and veggies, and I've had a few responses, so I'm going to do a little bit of a video tutorial on how I'm going to make these and how everyone else can make them as well. So I've already cut up all my fabric. I use mosquito netting just because it's a netting that is cheap and breathable for all your fruit and veggies. I've cut it up, so I actually used a roller and a green mat, but it's always good to have a pair of really sharp scissors as well, and a plastic ruler. These are quilting ones, so I know that not everyone uses quilting ones, but you can use just a ruler just to make sure it's straight because it's going to help you with sewing. As for the edges, I've had a couple of ideas on how I'm going to go about the edges, but I've got a few ribbons, so I keep lots of bits and pieces of ribbons, and I've also got bias binding, so you can pick that up from Spotlight. There's different colours and widths. You can buy it by the metre, or you can buy it in packets like these. A few different colours, you can get it in every colour. I've kind of got a few colours to choose from. You just need to make sure it's at least sort of an inch thick. Any thinner will be really difficult to sew and you won't be able to get all these edges into where they need to be. I've also got Bessie all ready to go, all threaded up, so I'll see how I go. So I've just pinned the two top bits. I thought this is probably the easiest way. It's similar to the way that we do joy pouches, so you do the top bit first and then do your edges, and the edges will get covered up all sort of neatly with the top, and it will sit a bit better at the top. It won't be so pinched. What I've noticed with pinning these is that the fabric is really slippery, so use as many pins as necessary to get it to stay because you won't want that sliding around. I've also got on my machine a different needle for this fabric because it's slippery. I've got a stretch needle. So I've just sewn the tops. I did have a little bit of a whoopsie with one of them. The machine caught it up with the needle and it didn't like it very much. Snapped the thread, so I've actually replaced the needle, so it's brand new sharp needle. My stitching isn't very straight. This fabric is proving a little bit more difficult to play with compared to some of the other ones. So this is the other one. The pins are still left in. I tried to leave some pins in. This is my first one to see if it would move or not as I was sewing. So the second time I moved them as I was going. Now I've done the two tops, I will do the sides. I've now got both the sides pinned together. I found that the little small pins were a lot easier to use than some of the bigger ones that I've got, so I've just kept with using those ones. As for the edges, I'm not really too sure how I'm going to go about it. I'll do this one. I've just folded over the edges to try and make it as neat as I can. I've done that top and bottom and for both sides just to try and keep it all really neat. So, last two sewing bits. And here it is. So the first one finished. I've just done the edges. A little bit more difficult to sew the ends because it's quite thick of fabric. And I tried to go as straight as I possibly could to keep it all in. But here we go. There's the first one. I've probably got a few more improvements to make for the others, but doing pretty well with these. Also, like to add, I'm using a small stitch. When you're using any sort of slippery or stretchy fabric, the smaller the stitch size, the better in holding it together so that it doesn't slip too much. And when I also mentioned about the bias binding being an inch thick, and like this, you know, definitely isn't in an inch. So there's a bit difference in bias binding. I've opened it up and there's actually the edges are folded in there, so that's why it's so thick to begin with, and then it all gets folded up and makes this really neat edge. So I just finished the third one and I actually used a bit of ribbon. I've got ribbon and I've got bias. So ribbon is probably a bit more cheaper than bias. Bias can be expensive depending on what type you get. So as long as it's thick enough on the edges to go around both sides, it's perfectly okay because ribbons are sealed, and pretty happy with it. So I've just finished another one using some ribbon, but I used kind of a satin ribbon, and I don't think I would use a satin ribbon again. It puckers, so it doesn't sit really flat, and it kept getting caught. It's just as slippery as the fabric, so it made it a little bit harder to work with. It looks nice, but I would choose something that's a little bit not so slippery for a ribbon. I've just finished another one with a different kind of bias binding. So this stuff was, it's the same brand as the other one, but was a lot stiffer to use, so it's actually given me a lot nicer edging, and it was really easy to pin it all together to create this one. So I quite like the stiffer binding as well. It works quite well to keep it all together and doesn't slip around as much. It kind of keeps a hold of the fabric. I've just created another one. I think this is number 8, and I've actually used fabric for the top. So if you don't have ribbons or bias and you have fabric scraps, you could also do the same. So I did similar sort of thing with the bias where you fold it under to make it all neat, and it works just as well as the bias and the ribbons. All done, I was able to make 10 from a metre of fabric. It was only $6 from Spotlight, so pretty cheap, all different sizes. The last two I used a different bias binding. It was a lot thicker. I quite like that it's a little bit different, so any sort of thickness will do to be able to just hem them. This is my big one, it's the largest, should be good to take to the markets. And it's a bit of fabric and bias binding, so you can get creative, mix and match and create lots of them. So I hope this was helpful for everyone, and get creative.